Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Thomas Ray. I am an assistant dean in the Office of Undergraduate Admissions at Wake Forest University, and I am joined today by Dr. Malika Roman Isler, the Assistant Vice President of Inclusive Practice. Dr. Roman Isler is also an affiliate faculty member in the Health and Exercise Science Department and is also a Wake Forest alumna. Thank you, Dr. Roman Isler, for being with us here today. Before we get started, there are just a few things that I want to share with you. Our session itself will last for roughly an hour. We'll have some time for conversation with Dr. Roman Isler. There'll be space, of course, for you to ask your questions. We recognize that this is somewhat of a busy time of year for many of us, and especially for our attendees here today. And so if you find yourself of needing to step away a little bit before our session ends, we totally understand, but of course, we certainly hope that you'll stay with us for the entirety of our session. The Q&A function is available to you for the duration of our session. So as we move along, if you have questions that you'd like to pose, please feel free to submit your questions there. My colleague, Maya Hinton, will be responding to questions as she's able. She'll also come back and join our conversation towards the end to pose some questions to Dr. Roman Isler herself. So Maya, thank you for being with us here today as well. One final thing that I have to mention, and this of course goes out to all of you that are watching and in attendance with us today, and it's very simply a word of congratulations. Being at this part of your high school careers, being at this part of the admissions process, I know there's been a lot of stress. I know there's been a lot of hectic moments, but there should be a lot of excitement too. In relishing in this moment of celebrating the accomplishment of being admitted, all the hard work, the efforts, the energies, the dedication that you've had, and that you've committed yourself to your high school career. It says a lot. It says a lot to be admitted, especially given the nature of this year, especially considering how competitive it is to be admitted to a place like Wake Forest and to so many other places. You deserve to be celebrated. And so we celebrate you. We honor you in this moment. We say congratulations. We're excited for you and certainly looking forward to the prospect of you potentially joining our campus community here in Winston-Salem. And so I want to turn at this point to you, Dr. Roman Isler. You're the Assistant Vice President for Inclusive Practice. What does all of this mean exactly? I mean, to occupy this role, to have this responsibility, can you tell us a little bit about what all of this is?
Sure, happy to do so. And thank you so much for having me here this afternoon and giving me an opportunity to address our future deacons. As an alum, I am certainly excited about each new class that comes into our Wake Forest community, and I look forward to connecting with each of you as you have made decisions or are making decisions about formally joining the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. But you're right, I have this title that can sound a little lofty, Assistant Vice President of Inclusive Practice, and it is a new position for our institution, and I am I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but I have the opportunity, really the privilege to be the first person to hold this role. And I've been in this position for about 18 months now. And the position really came as another building block or a step for the university in further committing our resources and our strategies to making sure that everybody feels like they can show up at Wake Forest. And that's not new to us as a campus. That is work that had been going on. But the reason my position was created and what that really means is that, oftentimes in universities, in businesses, in almost any space that you hold, people will have the values or the aspirations of being a place where people across gender, across race and ethnicity, across ability, across language, across socioeconomic status, that people feel welcome there. But we also know that in many spaces, even though that may be our aspiration, that may not in fact be the lived experience of the people who are a part of that community or who use the services of a particular business. And so my role was created, and my job really is focused on inclusive practice, which is how do we take what we believe and make sure that we put that into practice in our everyday policies and our procedures and the ways that we engage with one another. And so we want to create less of a gap. Almost every no place is perfect, right? And so there's who you want to be and there's how people experience you. My job is to make sure that we don't have this much space, that we keep bringing those two things closer together. And so that's really what my work is about, working with partners across campus, with students, working closely with faculty and staff, other administrators such as yourself, to really think about how do we go about our business in a way that ensures that nobody is left away from the table, that everybody can show up and bring all of who they are authentically and have that appreciated and valued at Wake Forest. So that's what my job is.
And that sounds like a big job. I know there's a lot of time and effort and energy that goes into that, but certainly, as you mentioned, addressing that gap really truly makes for a better Wake Forest. And certainly as students and community members, as alums of the university, we
Mhm.
are better equipped to go
Right.
out in the world and to address those, no matter their identities or how we might be interacting with them. So
Absolutely.
important work for sure. And you mentioned something that brings to mind these kinds of buzzwords and these kinds of things that we hear about a lot now, right? You turn on the TV and there are these questions about diversity and inclusion, and
Mhm.
especially for our admitted students, when they're thinking about these particular terms in the context of higher education. I know that's something that's kind of been batted around. Of
Mhm.
course, again, the news itself, these questions come up. And so as far as Wake Forest is concerned, what should our admitted students know as it relates to diversity and inclusion here?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing I would offer is that you're right. They're buzzwords. They're being used a lot in a lot of different contexts. But we understand them to be very different things at Wake Forest. Diversity is not the same thing as inclusion. And I'll offer that, broadly, we talk about diversity as just being who's here or who gets to show up to the party, who gets to come, who gets to be a part of the community. But that's very different from when people show up, how do they feel valued and appreciated and get to develop a sense of belonging and feel seen and respected for all of who they are? That's what inclusion is. And so, one thing I would offer that I think is very important for people to consider as they become members of this community is that we're working on both of those fronts at Wake Forest, not just getting you here, but also making sure that once you here, you find the places that connect with all parts of who you are, that the ways in which we engage with you in the classroom, the ways that we engage with you outside of the classroom, the opportunities that are presented to you are done in a way that align with respect and appreciation for all of who you are. And so, though recognizing that it's not just a matter of people physically being present, but being able to be present and thrive are the two parts of that coin, not just be diverse, but to also be inclusive. And, really across all the facets of identity. So, racially, ethnically, a range of ability, gender expression, sexuality, language, and socioeconomic status, because sometimes we forget about the diversity that exists with that. And these are things that have received a lot of attention, particularly in higher education, as well as other fields and sectors. But I am again really thankful that these aren't new things to Wake Forest. But we have taken some opportunities given, our most recent social and political climates to really make sure that our work is not just happening, but it's happening in a way that is meaningful and impactful. And so if I had to think about, something that I think is really important for admitted students to know and to have a sense of is that we really are working diligently to make sure that our actions, our policies, and our practices align with our aspirations. And we're not perfect by any means. No place is, but we really are working across the institution, across all sectors of Wake Forest, to make sure that everybody in our community is able to do their part, because it takes all of us to make an inclusive Wake Forest, and that we have a shared sense of direction and a comprehensive plan. And there's so many things that we've been doing related to that. As one example, I think it's important for folks to know, just last June, we adopted our first institutional framework for inclusive excellence. And so while we had a number of programs and efforts that were going on across the community and across the campus, we now have a shared vision around what are the areas where we have to really think about the greatest opportunities for impact, whether it's for people who are on their individual journeys of identity development and their own learnings about their own cultures and other cultures, or whether it's how people are engaging within the context of their student organizations or in an academic or administrative department, or even for our senior leaders who are in the institution, our cabinet, our president. That framework gives us all a sense of, we know that we want to be better, but what are the things that we have to do to be a better Wake Forest and a more inclusive Wake Forest? So that's really significant for us in terms of thinking about how we're moving with our levels of diversity and inclusion. Some other examples I would offer for our incoming students to think about is even before you get here, this is a part of the value that we're extending. Students who have been admitted before you come on campus, you'll actually have to participate in an online training on diversity, equity, and inclusion, because we want you to understand how we value it as an institution and make sure that you have, coming into this community, a sense of what the value of diversity is, how you can recognize and manage the biases that we all have, because if you have a brain, you have bias. So we all are managing and trying to navigate the kinds of biases that we have. How we build connections and meaningful relationships and communicate with people across difference. So there are so many things that are happening that are very tangible, actionable ways of operating in our institution that I think are important for students to know about, that we're not just talking the talk, but we are walking the walk. And we're very much aligning our resources and practices with making sure that everybody gets to feel like they belong at Wake.
It almost feels like every time I'm involved or I hear some discussion about diversity and inclusion at Wake Forest, there's something new that I'm learning or something new that I'm realizing. I mean, and even just kind of jotting down a couple of things here, this kind of comprehensive, right? This cohesive, this framework,
Mhm.
top to bottom,
Mhm.
really does exemplify the kind of approach that we want to have as it relates to diversity and inclusion. But then, even just establishing these baselines of competencies that is really, really important, especially again, as we talk about community building. So, wow, that's great. And I'm wondering at the same time though, how is or how does Wake Forest position itself maybe a little different or apart? How do we set ourselves apart from other institutions that, again, are doing this kind of work as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there are a number of things. And I mean, I certainly wouldn't, put down any of the work that anybody else is doing. Because I think, every institution is doing a process of self-examination and really thinking about what does the journey look like for them. Everybody has their own unique histories, their own cultures, their own dynamics that it should inform how they're moving the work forward. But I will say, I probably am biased because I'm an alum and I came back to work, so I have a lot of love for Wake Forest and this is my work. And so I believe in it and I'm actively engaged in it all the time. But I would say, some of the things that set us apart is that a lot of what informs how we think about creating a sense of belonging and inclusion at Wake Forest is based upon our ability to really make those personal connections, right? And to get a very in-depth understanding of what people's journeys have been, what brings them to the table at Wake Forest, and what those experiences, how they create their experience over the course of 4 years at Wake Forest. And so being able, the language we often use is that we're high touch. We are connected to who you are, not just a face in a classroom, but to what your experiences are, what your interests are, what your motivations are, the things that bring you joy, the things that have caused you pain, and how you connect all of those things into your learning experience, but also to your emotional and social development, even outside of the classroom. And our ability to do that, I think, is really unique and a strong value, not only for being able to thrive at Wake, but also being able to attend to all of the diversity that we bring in terms of who we are to the table, because we're connected to those very unique aspects of who we all are. Our faculty are easily accessible for things like conversations and developmental opportunities. Again, you're not just a face in their classroom. They get to know who you really are, and you get to know who they are in terms of their work, their research, and their service. And the same is true for our administrators. At a lot of schools, students, particularly larger schools, students don't get to see, let alone interact with the president or people who are on cabinet level, vice presidents. I can't tell you how many times I've seen our president or our vice president for campus life walking on campus with a student, just having either sitting down to have lunch, walking, having a conversation, walking up and starting a new conversation. And those are things that can't be taken for granted, in the kind of atmosphere that we have at Wake Forest. We also really strongly believe, not just in the context of our diversity and inclusion work, but broadly in terms of how the university operates, there's so many spaces and places where students serve alongside people who are in formal leadership roles. So different committees, commissions, designing campus talks and programs. And the students are right there as co-leaders with our formal staff and faculty. And I'm currently serving on a presidential work group right now where we're working on accountability measures related to diversity and inclusion. And there are several students who are on this committee with me, and they are very much a part of the drive in helping us to think about, what does this look like? How does this impact student lives? What are students needing? What are the opportunities for developing here? Last week, I went to the keynote that they did on climate movement and feminism. And I was so inspired to see different students who were leading the lines of questioning from the national expert. That doesn't happen in all spaces. And so those are some things that aren't just great for diversity and inclusion, but great for a thriving collegiate experience. And Wake Forest certainly believes in that as a value and creates a lot of opportunities to do that. So students can help shape the culture that we have, shape the direction that we're going as an institution. I want to just, if I have a moment, just highlight a couple of other things that I think are really key considerations for thinking about a community like Wake. We have a stellar well-being initiative. It's called Thrive. So if you've not already taken a look at that, do take a look at that. The website is thrive.wfu.edu. When you think about not just coming to learn, but having embedded in our culture and our institution ways to think about being more mindful, to become more resilient, taking care of your physical and social being, financial literacy, being able to get nationally certified as a peer educator and leading others in doing this work. Those are some of the opportunities that I think are really valuable in such a close-knit community, and a community that thrives on making those connections across its members. So those are some things that I would say I definitely would want our admitted students to consider and think about as benefits to coming and being a Dean and Deacon.
Speaking of becoming a demon deacon, I want to shift our conversation just a little bit, and I'm going to ask you to turn back the clock and think back to your time as a senior in high school, your college search, and all the great places that you were considering. And there came a point in time where you decided to make Wake Forest your home. And as you think about your first days on campus as a student, your final days as a student, the time that has transpired since, and of course, as you mentioned, coming back to the university to work, like has Wake Forest changed, or how do you view Wake Forest as it relates to diversity and inclusion, having had this long extended relationship with the university?
Wow, that's a great question. And first of all, let me just say, I feel some sort of way about how you said, let's go way back in time, because we don't have to go that far back, okay? But I'll go ahead and take that this time. But I'll turn back my mind just a little ways to back when I was a student. Don't have to go too far back, but yes. A number of things have changed. There are the very obvious things that Wake physically has grown as a campus so much. It is interesting as I came back to visit, even over the years and coming back as a staff person, places where there used to be a field, there are now buildings, or where there might have been a walkway, it now houses something else. So there's been a lot of physical development and growth that I think is consistent with our intellectual growth and capacities as an institution, as we have become even more global and dynamic as an institution of higher ed. But there's also, a lot of change related to diversity and inclusion and the offerings at Wake Forest. We have a more diverse student population now. than we did when I was a student, which I think has only added really the color, and not just like physical, visible color, but the depth and the richness of what Wake Forest is, not only as an institution, but also our position within the field of higher ed. We have a lot more richness of experiences and exposure and opportunities for learning and connecting with the lived experiences of people who may not be just like us. And so that has certainly changed since my time as a student, that we have more of that accessible to us. We've also learned, as the world has evolved and become more global, to think about ways to really set our students up for success. We're having the conversations about diversity and inclusion. We're incorporating inclusive pedagogy, or the ways in which people learn differently, the ways in which we give value and visibility to different perspectives and different ways of knowing and being within the classroom, but also in our programs. That's very different and something that we have evolved into over time. But also some of the different levels of student support. I think about our Office of Professional and Career Development. We have an award-winning OPCD team. We didn't have that when I was a student, right? It was kind of, you do your 4 years, you either apply to grad school or you do an internship or do some networking and you go out and apply for your jobs. But now, as a part of the collegiate experience, we have all of the resources to help students learn more about what their strengths are, really thinking about that strength focus, to think about career and vocation, which aren't always the same thing, to think about developing their skills in interviewing and internships and job placement, networking. And Wake Forest has we have such an extensive network of people in all kinds of fields. And even in the curricular experience, thinking about the college to career courses that we have. We've also had an amazing growth in our identity centers. When I was a student, we had the Multicultural Center, and that was it. And that was kind of like, for anyone who holds an underrepresented identity, that was kind of the home space for you. Now we have an Intercultural Center, we have the Women's Center, we have the LGBTQ plus Center, we have the Office of Civic and Community Engagement, we have the Office of Disability and Learning Assistance. So there are so many spaces now that are connecting to creating space and ensuring success for people in all the ways that we show up at Wake Forest. And certainly that is a development since the time that I was a student way back in time. I'd say also probably the global exposure and exchange. I mean, we have a larger proportion of international students who bring a certain richness to our institution as well. Many more of our students are able to study abroad than they were when I was a student, and largely because we've been able to look at and create more flexibility into our curricular experiences that allow, and we have lots of different options for students to choose from to study abroad as well. So those are some of the things where I think, like, whoa, if I were doing it now, I'd choose Wake Forest again. I would certainly choose Wake Forest again. And there's so many opportunities to support our students, not just being present, but being well and thriving and having a great sense of belonging.
I couldn't help but think as I listened to you talk, Dr. Romanizla, about Maya Angelou,
Mhm.
specifically this rich tapestry, right? That these
Yes.
people and their experiences and all the things that they bring with them of building and creating this Wake Forest, realizing that we have not crossed the finish line at all, right? That there's still so much more as an institution, and certainly thinking about the composition of our student body, there's an opportunity and room for us to grow. But I think at the same time of having the support of administrators, the vision of administrators to
Mhm.
change Wake Forest in really transformative ways.
Mhm.
Certainly there's a lot to be excited for as we kind of look into the future, and certainly thinking about the changes that happened just recently, not
Mhm.
that long ago, just recently since you were on campus. As a student, at least, certainly there's a lot to look forward to as we think of what might come in the next 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, and so on.
Mhm.
And so I've got one other question that I wanted to pose to you, and certainly kind of thinking about the Q&A. I'm not sure what's been coming in at this point, but if you haven't posed a question, take a second to do so. But I want to ask you, especially considering the hats that you wear at the university as a
Mhm.
senior administrator, as a faculty member, as an alum, what kind of advice would you give to a student who's trying to decide where they're going to spend the next 4 years? Because let's face it, it's not a 4 year decision, right? It's a decision that will follow far beyond those 40 years. You hear 40-year decision. You hear a decision that will follow you to the grave. I mean, however you might want to describe it, it's a big decision to make. And so for someone that might be kind of on the fence, or maybe is just not quite sure of what direction to take,
Yeah.
what kind of advice do you offer? What kind of suggestions do you have as they move forward in their decision making process?
Yeah. And it's a big decision to make. You're right. It's not just about the next 4 years, because I know from my own experience and the experience of people who went to school with me, people who went before me, who came after me, being able to have that Wake Forest degree, being able to have the rigors of the intellectual, the challenges that you will have to navigate, the critical thinking and reasoning skills that you have to bring to bear, those carry you far. They carry you far. And so it's not just about the 4 years, it is about all of the opportunities that and doors that it opens up for you, both personally in terms of your ways of thinking and knowing, but also accessibility to opportunities as you go out in the world. And so you're right, it is well beyond the 4 years. The advice I would offer is acknowledge that and choose what really works for you. And I know that, if you've been admitted to Wake Forest, you're already a highly competitive student, clearly. You have options. I would also say though that, and I hope that you don't slap my hand for this, Thomas, that Wake Forest is not the place for everybody. But if you choose to come here, there is a place for you. If you choose Wake Forest, there is a place for you in the classroom, within the campus community, within the Winston-Salem community. There is personalized work and learning to be done. And if you choose Wake Forest will show up for you to ensure that you get that experience. If you're looking for, that rigorous scholarship, if you want to really expand what you know and how you know things and how you critically assess things, if you want to have deep connections with your faculty and with other students and with staff, and if you want to have opportunities to really develop as a global leader, come come to Wake Forest. Like that, this is a place that nurtures that and creates space for that. And again, I mean, I'll be the first to say we're not perfect. We're not a perfect institution, but we are truthfully examining ourselves and building systems to continue to make ourselves better, both in the classroom and in the campus experience. So those are the things that I would offer to someone as they're trying to make that decision.
And that's fantastic advice. Thank you so very much for pouring that wisdom, that knowledge, that expertise out today, not only just with regard to diversity and inclusion, generally speaking, but of course, to the great work that is happening here in Winston-Salem at Wake Forest University. At this point, I think that's going to do it for my questions. And so I'm going to actually turn things over to Maya for any questions that might have been submitted from our attendees.
Thank you, Thomas.
So I do have some great questions queued up for you, so we can jump straight into those.
Okay.
First one I have for you is, oh, I love this one. Is there diversity within Greek life?
Ah, great question. And so first, let me offer that I do work with a lot of students, but I am not over fraternity and sorority life. And so some of the specifics, I may not be the best person to ask. But one of the things that I can say is we have, first, a number of our students choose to affiliate with fraternity and sorority life. So that is something that is very normative as a part of our social experience. But there's also a fair number of students who do not choose to affiliate in fraternity and sorority life. We have those organizations that are historically and predominantly white, that are a part of the Pan-Hellenic Council and Interfraternity Council. But we also have the Noble Nine, or the historically Black fraternities and sororities that are part of the National Pan-Hellenic Council. But we also have multicultural organizations or fraternities, those that are based on service, but also other topics of interest in the institution. And so those tend to be as well, have a greater sense of cultural, racial, and perhaps also socioeconomic diversity. But certainly the fraternity and sorority life are areas of our campus that are alive and well and thriving in terms of the social space, providing opportunities for students to connect, to mobilize together around philanthropy and community service. And so there is a range of opportunities based upon identity that students have in engaging in Greek life.
Great. What would you say are the greatest areas of improvement that are needed with respect to diversity and inclusion and belonging on campus? And what would you say are some of the biggest concerns for underrepresented students?
Yeah, great questions. Right now, I'd say our greatest opportunity is probably continuing to build systems of accountability. Certainly we have, and most institutions are really good at providing education and training opportunities. We are institutions of higher learning. That's what we do. We create space for people to know more and to know differently than the ways in which they currently do. There is always a balance, though, that we continue to try to think about how to create the space for, in terms of giving people the space to, or supporting the space for people to develop and grow in their own perspectives and understandings about the world, themselves and others, but also having some really clear standards and boundaries that can't be breached as part of this community. And then when people do, how do we, in a way that is teaching out of care and concern, but also providing direction, new direction, hold people accountable for the ways in which they engage in the community that can create experiences of discrimination, experiences of isolation, experiences of bias for those who should not be, for no one should be receiving that, but for those who are on the receiving end. And so certainly this is a space where people are supported in having their own ideals and views, and we have community standards that say that no one has the right to make this a space where someone else feels like they don't belong. And so in terms of opportunities, it's an ongoing journey, I think, not just for Wake, but across the world, and across the nation, to think about how do we honor people's individual beliefs and values and experiences, but also have really clear boundaries against which those cannot infringe upon the experiences, identities, and lives of others.
Yeah. Let's see. So what are some ways that students can get involved with the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion? Where are there opportunities for students to dive into that kind of work?
Yeah, there are a lot. There are a lot of opportunities at Wake. And usually, we are always trying to find, some of those things are student driven. Some are driven by staff who run and work in the different identity centers, but they're always in partnership. And so one of the first places I say is don't miss the opportunities in your coursework to learn more about diversity and inclusion and various aspects of that. And we have, different departments that have courses to learn more about the content and some of the histories, like on our women, gender, and sexuality studies. We have a new African American studies department. Sociology has a number of courses, Latin American and Latino studies, but then also those co-curricular spaces, such as our identity centers. So in our intercultural center, each of our centers host Heritage Months, where there are different programs and lectures and community engagement opportunities tied to different aspects of identity. But those are always planned and developed largely by student-led committees. So for those students who are looking for opportunities to be directly engaged in diversity and inclusion work, connecting with our identity centers are a great way to do that. We are currently in Asian Heritage Month. We have Black History Month, Latinx Heritage Month, Native American Heritage Month, and all of those are programmed and developed largely by our students. Students are the lead developers and staffers for things like our World Cultural Festival. Students serve as intercultural ambassadors to really help support students in their identity journeys as a part of their 4-year experience. Students can volunteer to be a part of things like Roots, the first year initiative, which matches upperclassmen with incoming first-year students who are underrepresented identities to help them to think about how they navigate through the community. There are also fun social things like Friday morning breakfasts that take place in the Intercultural Center. Queer History Month through our LGBTQ+ Center happens in October. There are also virtual communities that students can get involved in, like QT Pop Connections, which is a virtual space for queer and trans students of color. There are different training opportunities like Deep Allies, which is run through our LGBTQ+ Center, where they hold a series of trainings to help people to build their knowledge and their skills around sexual orientation and gender identity. Our Women's Center just held Women's History Month in March with a lot of different programs and keynotes. They hold bi-weekly gender chats on things like gender and religion and self-care. I mentioned the climate feminism workshop that they just held last week. There's also a feminist leadership project. There's peer education. And you can't forget, there's the Office of Civic and Community Engagement. They do a lot of work around philanthropy and civic engagement, political engagement, helping people learn how they can engage in American democracy. They have a social justice incubator, which is a space for students who want to learn how to collaborate and engage around issues related to social justice. They host the Freedom School, which is a literacy-based summer program for elementary and middle school children. These are all ways that students can both lead and connect to social justice, equity, diversity, inclusion related programs, advocacy work, and both on our campus and in the broader community. So there is a whole breadth of opportunities for students to not only have the learning in the classroom, but also get engaged on the campus and the broader community.
Yeah, you mentioned like a lot of the student-led organizations. I'm just a couple years removed from Wake, and so one of my favorite events that I remember is BSA, our Black Student Alliance, and OLAS, which was an organization for some of our Latinx students. They would collaborate and do Soul Food Fiesta, so that was something that I really enjoyed going to every year. So another question that I have for you is, how has Wake facilitated conversations surrounding race and social justice within our community and within, more globally thinking?
Yeah, I mean, in a number of ways, right? And some of it, I would say there is, it makes me think about kind of parenting. There is no handbook for how to do it perfectly, right? The same is true for this. We know that the conversations have to be had, and we learn each time we do it about the ways in which our community wants to be engaged, the places and spaces where they need to have outlets for conversation and connection, but also for advocacy and change. But we've held things like deliberative dialogues where we have taken topics related to diversity and inclusion and really help people to unpack the various views and understandings and give people a place to really mobilize around their understandings of different diversity issues related to our campus, but also the world more broadly. We've held different town halls where our president or our vice presidents, our chief diversity officer has been available to speak to certain events on our campus, events that are happening in the world, and give people opportunities to ask questions about how we're being responsive, to offer their recommendations about ways that the institution can move forward. I also know that regularly our leaders meet with students on campus, both students who are mobilized in grassroots efforts of their own, who want to meet with the leadership to propose different action steps, but also students who have concerns, who are saying, this is how I'm experiencing this. This is how I'm understanding, this is how I'm impacted by this particular happening in the world. And being able to meet with and give voice to what those experiences look like and what our response as an institution is, and what the opportunities are for them to be advocates and activists in those various realms. And I would say I also appreciate one of the responses that we have is that we don't just have conversations about the feelings and experiences, but also how we're doing ongoing learning and accountability. And so I referenced that before, that some of the deepest work that we've been doing over the past 2 years or so is really around making sure that everybody is moving in the same direction, that we are focused on the same kinds of opportunities to, or the same end goals in terms of Wake Forest being inclusive, and that we're building in systems to make sure that it's not just aspirational, but it's a part of how we do business. How do we build that into our admissions processes? How do we build that into our financial aid? How do we build that into our course experiences? How do we build that into selection processes within fraternity and sorority life? How do we build that into how we do space allocation and room assignments? So it becomes more a part of the system. And so having conversations, not just about who we want to be, but what we're doing and what we're learning from that process.
I like how you said that it's, important to make this an ongoing conversation. And so thinking about, this past year that we've had with COVID-19, how are we keeping these conversations going, in a space where we might not be able to meet face to face all the time, or, have those in-person town hall meetings?
Yeah. It is really, I have been pleasantly surprised at the ways in which we have still, granted it is different than being able to show up face to face and share physical space with people, but we have been able to really maintain our culture of the high touch and engagement, even in a time of social distancing. And so I know regularly we have different steering committees, named COVID specifically, that have been navigating and making decisions for our institution in terms of how we operate, how we provide emotional, financial, and academic support to students and the families that are impacted by COVID, and still being able to have regular convenings that are open to our faculty, open to our staff, conversations with and that are open to our students to talk about, this is what we understand related to COVID right now. This is how we're shifting operations. These are the resources that are available. This is what we're learning from the federal government. This is what we're learning from CDC. So that process is very collaborative and done in a transparent fashion. So I would say the ways that we've been able to maintain that is by still creating the space. Even when people can't gather physically, you still have to create that space, even in a virtual setting, for people to hear about what's happening every day. Particularly since last March, people have had to make decisions about caregiving. They've had to make decisions about how they work, if they work, when they work. They've had to make decisions about how they care for people in their homes, how they isolate, all of these things that we've all had to navigate in a very dynamic fashion. And I would say, the ways in which we have held town halls and conversations, university updates, email communication. I know our HR has done a really great job sending out these different updates related to accessibility to vaccines and how our employees and our students can get access to that. And so I think making sure that those lines of communication have stayed open, and that they reach everyone who's a part of our community, whether they are able to physically be on campus or not, I think are some of the ways that we've been able to maintain those connections.
Yeah, so I think that was all of the questions I have for you today. Thank you for being here with us. I'm gonna let Thomas round us out, close us out for today, but thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I can only just echo Maya's sentiments of thanks, of gratitude to you, Dr. Roman Isler, for spending just a few minutes with us today. Certainly, again, we really, really appreciate all that you've been able to share, and certainly for our admitted students, for those in attendance, with us. I'm sure that you invite this conversation to continue, certainly after they decided to enroll at Wake Forest. Certainly, we look forward to continuing this conversation because, as it was mentioned, this is ongoing work. There's no
Absolutely.
finish line to this. So, again, thank you, thank you, thank you for being with us.
Thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here. I look forward to seeing all of you in the fall. Go Deeks, make the right choice, and come on to Wake Forest.
Thank you so much. And just a couple quick things before I let everybody go. I recognize that our conversation has been from 30,000 feet, right? From the perspective of a senior administrator at Wake Forest. And so if you as a student are looking and wondering and wanting to engage a little bit more with our current students on campus, there will actually be some more virtual sessions where they will be in attendance to share with you their experiences. And so Dr. Roman Isler had mentioned a little bit earlier about these identity centers that we have across campus. And I want to just throw in the chat here just some of the logistical pieces of their meetings. And so you'll find the LGBTQ plus center to be meeting next week, the intercultural center also next week. And then the week prior, there's a session for our first generation student population, and then for the Women's Center as well. And so if you identify in any way, shape, or form with the identity centers, or if you consider yourself to be an ally, by all means, participate in those sessions. Join us, hear about some of the work that's happening there, hear about the initiatives that are taking place, and again, hear about the experiences of our students. There is, of course, a host of calendar full, really, of activities that are taking place over the duration of this month. And so even if you're thinking about from the student life perspective on campus to research, to study abroad, just as had been mentioned a bit earlier, there are a number of ways, again, for you to learn a little bit more about us. And if you have questions, if there are things that we can help you with, reach out to us. We are looking forward to engaging with you and certainly looking forward to helping you to better understand Wake Forest and the opportunities that you have here. Keep an eye on that inbox as well, because there are always messages that are coming out as we approach that May 1 deposit deadline. Again, if we can be a resource to you, don't hesitate at all to reach out. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to consider. Again, you've got some great options out there, but we appreciate you spending just a few minutes with us here today to better understand how Wake Forest will meet you where you are, but also where there's space, place, and opportunity for you as a member of our campus community. Dr. Roman Isler, thank you again. Maya, my appreciation to you, and of course to you, our attendees. Many thanks for your time today. Take the best of care. We look forward to engaging with you. And as always, go Deeks.